We respectfully acknowledge that the Windsor Regional Hospital occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Niswi, Ishkwiden, Anishinaabeg, the Three Fires Confederacy, Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. We acknowledge the land and the surrounding waters for sustaining us, and we are committed to protecting and restoring these lands and waters from environmental degradation.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the open board meeting of Windsor Regional Hospital for February 2nd, 2023. I will call the meeting to order. Do we have any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the previous minutes? And my screen is frozen, so I bet you Patty France has raised hers hand, and I assume seconded by David Mallion.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments with regards to the minutes? Hearing none, sorry guys, my video is not helping currently, so I apologize. I assume everybody is in favor of that motion. Wonderful, thank you. Just first thing, I just wanted to say congratulations to Windsor Regional Hospital for being recognized by the Trillium Gift of Life Network for its continued dedication to saving lives through organ and tissue donation during the pandemic. So in 21 and 22, Ontario Hospital supported 302 organ donors and 1,885 tissue donors. Windsor Regional Hospital had 9 organ donors, which led to 24 organs donated for transplant and 46 tissue donors, enhancing the lives of many. So congratulations to Windsor Regional Hospital and the community at large, because really it is everybody's responsibility to sign up to be an organ donor. So thank you to everybody. And congrats to Windsor Regional Hospital. So next up, we'll have the report of the President and CEO, David Moucher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, when I was asked about tonight's report, I had indicated that I want to look at it as a glass half full person. We've had too many times over the last 3 years where we are glass half empty. So the positive part is you will see getting kind of a snapshot of where we are across Canada with respect to influenza numbers, and the solid line is this year. And as predicted, of course, we had an earlier influenza season. It was a sharp increase. And the great thing about it is it only lasted approximately 7 weeks until we hit the peak, and then it started to drop, and the drop has been dramatic. So if you look at the average, that's that dotted line, the drop is a little more steady, and it takes a little longer to drop through the past years. But this year the drop was dramatic, and sure enough, that is reflecting in some of the results we're seeing. So that's very positive news. In the sense is we are past the peak, and even though traditionally influenza lasts until April 1st, it looks like we got through this influenza season early. Again, that is not to say influenza season is over. It is still in the community. You can still acquire influenza. It's just from a peak point of view, it's not as dramatic. At the same time, across Canada, hospitalizations for influenza and all of the age groups has steadied and is starting to drop. So that's again good news for these periods of time with respect to any hospitalization with respect to influenza. This is a chart we've been showing for the last few months, and it indicates those visits to the emergency department, how many in total. You'll see it's been pretty steady between 73 and 7,500, or close to 7,600 over the last 4 months. How many of those in the yellow line are non-respiratory visits, which is the vast majority, and how many are respiratory? And again, consistent with what we were seeing And what we're seeing across Canada is the respiratory visits are now starting to drop through the month of January, and hopefully that drop will continue into February. I apologize, these numbers are a little small and I do not know how to increase the size. But basically what this is showing is, I'll just do the colors of the lines, is if you look at the red line, that's the red-orange, that's the influenza line. And you'll see again, the peak occurred for us when it comes to those attending the hospital in November, and it's dropped dramatically in January. The same with respect to RSV, the peak in November, that's the green line, and it drops into January. With respect to COVID, that has stayed more constant. Some ups and downs, but definitely those coming into the hospital only for COVID is about the same throughout the months, give or take. So that's the constant number. The good thing about it, and this is the glass half full approach, is the fact that COVID did not spike in January. There was a little bump up after the holidays, but then it steadied itself. What we're probably going to have to get used to, which everyone's talking about, is that COVID's going to be with us for quite some time. What we'll probably face now is, unlike influenza and RSV, COVID, although impacted somewhat by nicer weather because people are out and about and don't spread it as much outside, is we're still going to have a steady amount of COVID even during the spring and summer, but hopefully we don't have any increases in COVID. The World Health Organization did not rescind its pandemic declarations, its emergency declaration. However, it is talking about that time is coming, that it will be rescinded hopefully within the next month or so, which is consistent with what we're seeing. Aside from that, we're still very busy at the hospital at both the Met and Olette campus. We still have occupancy rates above 100% at both campuses. Again, that has to do with the fact that we are still seeing patients that had their health issues delayed as a result of the pandemic, and we're still dealing with those types of issues with patients. Again, it is of no fault of the patients, of course, but they're coming to us. We are still admitting more patients than pre-COVID on a percentage basis and real number basis from the emergency department. So instead of admitting, say, every 1.5 patients out of 10 from the emergency department on a pre-COVID year, we're now admitting 2+ patients out of 10 on a given day into the hospital. At the same time, those patients are staying longer with us. Instead of, again, 6 days, they're staying upwards of 8 days on average between the patients. As a result, higher admission rates, more patients staying longer, more patients in beds. We are operating still 60 more beds than what we did pre-COVID. So these percentages are based upon that. So these are the percentages above that. And at the same time, we're waiting. The government has talked about, today they came out with their strategy with respect to healthcare. The announcements, they put them all together that they've been announcing over the last few months and outline their strategy with respect to issues like this, and talked about the continuation of these beds into this upcoming fiscal year, which is April of 2023. So we know the current beds we're operating, almost all of them have been submitted to get approved, and we're waiting on approval so we can continue to operate those beds post March 31st. So we're waiting to hear that. You'll see at both campuses, in addition, is we still have admit no beds. That's people who have been admitted but are waiting for a particular bed in the emergency department. Again, where RSV has dropped off a bit, our pediatric census is below 100%, which is good. NICU still busy, and critical care at both campuses ebbs and flows previous like it has done. But again, the numbers look okay at this stage with respect to critical care. Oops. the ALC issue, this is fascinating. And this is something, again, we've been talking about for quite some time. So as of 10 a.m., we had only 5 patients designated for ALC. All 5 have been ALC for long-term care for a total of 45 days. That means an average of 9 days per ALC. Again, flashback before Bill 7 was introduced, we had 33 ALCs for long-term care with a combined 913 days, an average of 27 days per ALC for long-term care. At this point, we have not had to collect on any letter issued for $400. We've been able to avoid having to do that. So as stated, if you remember when Bill 7 came out, a lot of concern, and rightfully so, that if someone did not take the first bed available of a long-term care and it was available, that they would be charged $400 a day. And that was the focus. At that time, we had stated we desperately needed that legislation. Otherwise, come December or now, we would be definitely in a crisis mode, no doubt. Sure enough, as predicted, is the numbers, especially for us, would drop dramatically as a result of Bill 7. And they have. Again, what Bill 7 did is it opened up discussions between the families, the patients, home and community care, in order to allow a more fulsome discussion about what's available. Instead of a very focused, finite discussion regarding your choices, it's okay, this is all that's available, not only in the community, but at your house. If you want to go back to your quote regular house, and that has resulted in this is some really positive results. And again, but for this, those numbers on the previous page would look that much worse, and a lot worse. So we're taking advantage of this. It's a great spot to be in. And again, just last point, that's not to say we'll never issue or start collecting on a $400 a day patient. That's not what we're saying. There's a possibility that that's going to happen, and unfortunately it might. But up to this point, even though we've had some very difficult discussions, they've all been resolved, and without having to collect on $400 from anybody. And again, this has been in place for a few months now. So very positive results, and I really appreciate our Erie St. Clair home and community care for our West region. They've done an amazing job working with our team. They're embedded in the hospital. They work with our team, work with patients, work with families on ensuring proper flow back to their regular home or community and our long-term care home. And it's been very positive. Again, these discussions are not easy. They're very difficult discussions because it's a lot of times definitely a change in lifestyle for everyone involved. And a change in their future, and it's very complicated. But again, the teams really work hard with the families to make it as smooth as possible. And the results speak for themselves when it comes to maximizing flow for patients that need acute care. So, Mr. Chair, that is my report.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. Does anybody have any questions or comments for David? Cynthia.
Yes, David, just wondering, I mean, that's great with the numbers for long-term care. I just wondered, do we have any information on patients, or were there any patients that did not get placed near their home? Did anybody have to go outside our region or anything? Are you aware of that or no?
For us, no. We did not have any patients that had to leave the region at all. So yeah, now again, I don't know across the rest of the province, but I haven't heard, through media or elsewhere, I haven't heard of, people being issued a lot of these $400 a day issuance or collection. I haven't heard it, and I would think we would hear about it. And I haven't, other than maybe the odd case. So again, it seems to be kind of working across the province, and I haven't heard, again, I think we would have heard if someone had to be moved. I think it was whatever, 150 kilometers
Right.
or whatever distance, but no, we have not had to come close to that.
No, that's good feedback, because that certainly was a concern out in the community.
Yep, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and again, going back to that, the dollar amount, that's historically always been there from hospitals as patients who have an alternative level of care bed available to them, even one of their choices, and they change their mind at the last second and they don't want to go. The ability, and hospitals always would say, we're going to charge you. The numbers were all over the map. Some would say we're going to charge you $2,500, $1,200, $1,500. So in a way, again, one of the positive things about Bill 7 is it's very focused. It's $400 for everybody. So you're not going to get 2,000 here, 2,500 here, 3,000 here, and you're going to be issued it for this issue, for that issue. It's very focused. So again, it's needless to say, it's a difficult piece of legislation, but it has had positive results, and it creates a clear focus and rules that everyone's got to follow. And so sometimes those are the best things.
Thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments for David? Seeing none. Great. Thank you, David. Next up, we have the CNE report. Karen is out tonight. I'm uncertain if somebody is filling in for her or we're just skipping it tonight.
We're skipping it.
Okay, this might be the quickest meeting of the year. So
exactly, she sends her best. And just remember, it's going to be the quickest meeting of the year because Karen's not here, right?
That absolutely, that does make a lot of sense. The Schulich report has been attached for your information. Did anybody have any questions or concerns with regards to that? Seeing none. Okay, great.
Mr. Chair, if I could just draw attention to one item on the report, which is some pretty good news. So I just wanted to share formally with the board that the ministry has granted the Windsor program an extra residency position per year for the psychiatry program. So going from 2 residents per year to 3 residents per year, which means that our cohort goes to 15 residents in total now in Windsor, Essex, doing psychiatry training here. And given our ability to retain these residents has been quite good, 75% to this point, I think that is going to speak wonderfully to the state of mental health care in Windsor, Essex. So it really is great news, and I wanted to share it with the board.
That is absolutely fantastic news, Dr. Jacobs. And sorry, I tried to skip over you. I do apologize for that. Does anybody have any questions or comments with regards to that exciting news? Nope, seeing none. All right, great. Thanks, Dr. Jacobs. Next up, we have the financial presentation. Mr. McLeod.
Good evening, all. And Anthony, I'll try and talk as slow as I can to stretch this meeting out.
Perfect.
Matt, can you put the slides up, please? Thank you, Matt. If you could go to the next slide. As reported last month, we were given notice of new funding for the pandemic prevention and containment, which was confirmed for the months July 2022 to March 2023, and that amount was a little over $2.2 million. And in the results for December 31st, we've recognized 1.5 million of that to date. Next slide, please. This is a slide we produce every month, and we'll be working with Melissa to try and simplify it if at all possible. The hospital has $4.3 million of surplus from hospital operations for the year to date, which is 2.1 million worse than the budget. The net surplus after building amortization is 3.4 million, which is 1.6 million worse than budget. The revenue surplus to date is $2.1 million, and that's lower than the expense deficit as volume projections for quality-based procedures have now been updated. Next slide, please, Matt. This slide shows the breakdown of the 18.4 million in COVID expenses. Unfunded COVID expenses total 3.8 million due to the differential for nursing externs. Expenses no longer funded via the incremental expense reimbursement after June 2022. Sick and isolation costs and additional staffing, incremental PPE, additional shuttle costs, storage of equipment. Unfunded expenses have been reduced as the pandemic prevention and containment funding has now been applied to all of these expenses. Revenue shortfall are shown on the right-hand side, and they're showing volume-based, quality-based procedures, neuro, cardiac, and wait time. When compared to budgeted volumes, there is an $8.4 million shortfall. $2.5 million loss in patient services, and $600,000 revenue loss in other recoveries. Next slide, please. These are the significant variances that the hospital has been facing. Salaries and wages have a $3.9 million deficit, and that includes the second temporary retention incentive for nurses payment, of which $3.2 million has fully been funded. And you notice there's another acronym, TRIN, which I decided I should spell out. We also have medical staff fees, which are short $6.5 million. $4.2 million is COVID funded through the temporary physician funding program, and $3.2 million offsets favorable patient revenue variance. Medical and surgical supplies show a $2.5 million deficit, and 84% of this deficit relates to incremental PPE. Drugs show a $3.4 million deficit, which is offset by favorable revenue in retail pharmacy. Next slide, please, Matt. Significant variances on the expense side also include office supplies of, other supplies of $3.6 million. $900,000 is regarding building and grounds maintenance and service contracts, $400,000 for minor equipment purchases, $360,000 for patient transportation costs as patients are transported to hotel due, nursing, and retirement home in order to free up beds, which was discussed earlier. $372,000 for physician recruitment, $306,000 for referred out cataracts, $282,000 for plant maintenance minor projects, and $140,000 for additional employee shuttle services to allow for social distancing. That is my report, Mr. Chair, and I would make a motion to accept the report from the January 23rd, 2023 FAR meeting be accepted.
Perfect. Thanks, Mr. McLeod. Can I get a seconder? Sorry, my screen went black again, so I can't see anybody. So if somebody wants to come off mute and say they will second it, that would be great.
I will second it, Paul Lachance.
Thank you, Paul. Technology is great sometimes. Does anybody have any questions for Ian or Melissa? Hearing none. Can I get a motion to, all in favor? Fabulous. Thank you. And opposed, I assume nothing. Okay, very good. Thanks, everybody. Again, sorry for the technical difficulties. We have the consent agenda there that we just did. Correspondence is printed there for your information. Board member questions. Does anybody have any additional questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none. The date of our next regularly scheduled board meeting is Thursday, March the 2nd. Can I get a motion to adjourn? I'm going to go with Paul because I can see him. And we'll go seconded by Ian because I can see him. Sorry, everybody. Again, my screen is doing something funny here. So all in favor? Perfect. Thanks. So why don't we just jump after we exit, if we can all just jump right into the in-camera session, that would be great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.